Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Social Work Bubble podcast. I'm your host, Laura, a social worker and therapist here in New York. Today, we have a recurring guest, Luccas Contreras. He's coming to us from Wisconsin, and he currently works with teens as a behavioral health facilitator. Welcome, Luccas, again.
Hello again.
Hello.
So glad to be on.
I'm glad to have you back. Today, We're going to be talking all about kind of like teens, your own experience in your teenage years with mental health, dropping out of high school, and also how that's kind of shaped your work with teens now. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. I hope your listeners don't get tired of my voice.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hate to sound cliche with like with saying like most people in our profession have had some sort of mental health, which kind of dived into our last podcast episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that was very much me. So I think before I said I like struggled with an eating disorder early on, and just some depression and anxiety, and that really started like at the age of 8. So, and then it just kind of progressed, where it began to get worse in those middle school, like pre-adolescent years, which, you know, God bless anybody who works with those kiddos, including myself. And I mean, I think at that point, you know, I started like self-harming, you know, like going through a big emo, like punk phase. And, you know, experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And I just felt like I didn't really fit in anywhere. And it just kind of continued from there into high school. So, you know, went through middle school, got really into art, and just as a means for like an alternative therapy,
Right.
to like help cope with what was going on. And
did it work for you? Was that helpful?
Yeah. So I ended up like at age of 14, 13 is when I first went to inpatient hospitalization. And then discharged from there and did like a day program and whatnot. And then just went back to seeing an individual therapist and, seeing a, psychiatrist. And I had like my up and down experiences with like seeing professionals where today it makes me very like skeptical of like seeing like a therapist or psychiatrist. And I work a lot with different medication providers like psychiatrists, APNPs, and therapists and social workers. And I really ride their ass, for lack of a better term, just because I know what it's like to be a teenager who I felt got misdiagnosed or didn't get the care that I needed or kind of fell through the cracks in that regard.
Definitely that advocate role then, like making sure things are going in the way that they need to.
Definitely. Yeah. I had to staff on a few of my clients earlier today, and I switched from one county that I worked for in Wisconsin to another county, and a similar role, working in behavioral health. But I struggle with being a bleeding heart, especially with my kids and teens, and just so many kids that fall under the cracks, especially because I work in the trenches in the program I work for is a Medicaid funded program. So a lot of people, low economic status. So yeah, the art helped, for a bit. And so I ended up, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and I ended up applying to a art high school. And it was the same high school that Erica Badu went to and Norwich. So that's my claim to
There
fame.
we go.
So ended up applying there, and again, just trying to figure out who I was
Hmm.
and figure out myself.
What did support look like for you at that time? Like, did you feel supported? Did you feel like
I
there
mean,
were people or resources there?
yeah, I mean, I feel like, I had a lot of support from my family, and, I can't really blame or put any, like, point the finger in their direction, because they were very supportive, both of my parents. Um, and, I was seeing a therapist, in Dallas who I found very helpful.
Hmm.
Um, but at some point, I think just with figuring out who I was, starting from those early like middle school years up into like high school, um, at some point, if you know a teen can just say like screw it and
Hmm.
I don't care and I don't like want to be involved with this,
Yeah.
especially if you're not feeling validated
Hmm.
enough or you don't feel like you fit in into any other like
Hmm.
social friend group. I mean, because you can get as much support from a therapist or be on medication or get as much support from your family, but
Yeah.
you also need that friendship component and
Absolutely. Especially
other.
when school is how you're spending the majority of your
Yeah,
time with other people outside of the home, outside of being with your therapist. I mean, it's huge.
yeah. And I mean, middle schoolers and high schoolers don't want to hang out with their parents normal,
No.
like generally.
Hmm.
So, um, it, it was me just trying to figure that out. And I think when you struggle, you tend to gravitate to other people that are struggling.
Hmm.
In which case, so I get into this art high school. Again, didn't feel like I fit in because I was just kind of self-taught. I did it for like a therapeutic measure.
Right.
And then I get there and everybody is like, oh, I've been taking art lessons since I was like 5. And I'm like, oh,
Okay.
I can barely draw like a still life. So,
Hmm.
um, and so once I didn't feel like I had that support system in high school, when I went to the ninth grade, I started trying to find somewhere else that I could fit in or be
Hmm.
supported within a friend group. Um, and I ended up gravitating, to more of the outcast of
Yeah.
like, or like, I don't know, like the people that didn't follow the rules, I
Hmm.
suppose. Like, and I ended up skipping school a lot. And,
Hmm.
that's when I started experimenting with like marijuana and like
Yeah.
drinking and all this other stuff.
What were you feeling during that time? Was it a sense of connection with these people that were at
Yeah.
school that you were with?
I mean, some of these people were not even at my school.
Hmm.
They were outside of school that I had met from like, like so and so or,
Right.
um, and it's, I think in a majority through like up until 18, 19, even, I mean, even in undergrad, I tended to gravitate towards people that were older.
Hmm.
So here, me being like 14, 15 years old, like being in a state of like vulnerability as a
Yeah.
teenager, and really trying to figure yourself out, like you could be hanging out with someone who is older, and if that person makes you feel accepted,
Hmm.
and even if they're doing things that you're not supposed to, like experimenting, you want to fit in. So of
Right.
course, like you want to do those things as well. And
Hmm.
especially if you're not feeling any other support or if you're feeling depressed or,
Yeah.
you know, going through any other like mental health stuff. Um, so my ninth grade year, I ended up missing so much school and not doing as much as I needed to. So I ended up getting kicked out of that school.
Mm.
Um,
What was
like
that like when that happened?
it was embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
It was very embarrassing, and you know, I felt like, you know, that people, like some of the teachers really just kind of gave up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it's easier, um, especially in a city like Dallas where you have so many students, it's really easy
Yeah.
to fall in the cracks of someone who's not doing their work or someone who's
Mm-hmm.
skipping school. Um, and yeah, no, I think there was embarrassment, and then I think that also just increased the like fuck it mentality, like
Right. Of
teenagers.
course.
So it's like I'm gonna own this,
Mm-hmm.
like um I don't know, for lack of a better term, like bad boy,
Yeah. Leaning
like
into it.
yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
might as well. So then I went to my like home high school, which was the
Mm-hmm.
closest to my neighborhood. Spent a little time there, struggled still, and then I was like, well, this isn't working out. Ended up getting hospitalized again,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I started experimenting with more heavy drugs, and again, just like hanging out with people, and friends of mine, that were also struggling with mental health, um, and began struggling with addiction, and older people that I hung out with that struggled with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Did it
and
feel affirming in a sense? Like I imagine when we're kind of
yeah,
going through it, we're seeing other people in a similar space and
yeah, no, it definitely felt affirming. I always say, us people from Dallas are rough around the edges because I would feel like if any of my friends that I grew up with that are from Dallas would say a similar story to what I'm saying.
mm-hmm.
Um, and as we got older, it's like, this wasn't a normal like teenage experience. This is actually pretty fucked up. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, people don't grow up this way normally.
Right.
Like, I mean, I was going to like parties with like very sketchy people,
Right.
like people would like fire off guns sometimes.
Mm.
Like I started getting into graffiti, like running
Yeah.
from cops, stealing, like all
Mm-hmm.
this other stuff, like just kind of, in a sense started to work the system because I felt like it had wronged me.
Right.
Um, and, um, so yeah, no, so went through that. I was like, I had
Mm-hmm.
a friend of mine that was like, oh, I went to this charter school. You should check it out. It's super easy. And I'm like, sure. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
all about the easy road.
There we go.
So went to the charter school. Same thing kept occurring. Truant,
Mm-hmm.
like hanging out with like my friends at the time that were doing essentially the same things. So
Yeah.
then,
Were you wanting to like change and get out of that at that point, or were you just
not at that point,
okay?
a little later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so ended up struggling and
Sure.
got kicked out of that school.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went back to my home high school and they put me into, the classes like where people that needed to catch up or
Mm-hmm.
like, kind of like what I would say like cast asides as well, like
Sure.
teen, teens that were pregnant or teens that were involved in like gangs or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there was that sense of embarrassment or
Yeah.
failure. Um, and maybe I didn't recognize that at that time. It was more of like, again, leaning into it or
Mm-hmm.
like owning it. It's like, no, I'm like anarchy, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
against the system, like,
Yeah.
this doesn't work for everybody. Um, and so it came to a point, like when I finished my junior year, um, they sat me down and they were like, Luccas, you're so far behind on
Mhm.
everything that we're most likely going to have to hold you back a year.
Mhm.
Um, in my head, I was like, well, fuck that. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
I had a friend who was a year younger than me, and we were the best of friends. Like,
Mhm.
we were like the tag team of like all bad things. Like,
Yeah.
I would sneak out of my house, like steal my mom's car, like go pick him up, or
Mhm.
like vice versa. Um, experimenting with like drugs and like graffiti, like going out to parties, like,
Mhm.
and he had dropped out and got his GED. And so I was like, well, why can't I do that?
Mhm.
And at this point in Dallas, if you have three unexcused absences in the city of Dallas, a school district, you get sent to truancy court and you get fined. So this was my second time around in truancy court,
Mhm.
and essentially it was like either I was gonna have to do more community service or like get fined or and start to be involved in the like youth justice system. Um, and so there was that component, and then also being like behind in school.
Right. Right. That's
Uh,
overwhelming to experience.
yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
mean, one thing
hard.
after another, like,
Mhm.
and so once they told me that, I'm like, well, I want to get my GED then. What do I need to do?
Mhm.
And they're like, well, the last day to take the GED is tomorrow for this school year.
Surprise.
And I was like, okay, um,
Wow.
like, let's do it then. Like, what do I got
Mhm.
to lose? And they were like, well, what you have to do is come early tomorrow in the morning, withdraw from high school, and then you go straight to the GED testing center and take the GED. So that's what I did. I was 17 and took the GED, passed it like flying colors.
Look at you.
And then it just affirmed my like,
Yeah.
screw the system.
Right.
like, look at me. Like, I, got my GED like a year before I was supposed to graduate high school.
Mhm.
But then at that point, from 17 to 18, like getting in the workforce and just like working full time and having these like aspirations of like still art and wanting to be an
Mhm.
artist. Like I always loved New York City,
Yeah.
and like I was like this bright-eyed teen. I'm like, I'm gonna move to New York City and
Of
become a famous
course.
artist and
Mhm.
live in a loft.
That's the dream.
Right? So 17 to 18, I began like essentially I was an adult. And once I dropped out of school, my mom was just kind of done with me. So
Mm.
she was like, kicked me out, and like, I ended up staying with my dad from 17 to 18. And during that time is really when I started to reflect
Mhm.
all of these past years
Sure.
that got me to this point. And you know, everybody I noticed that was older than me, like I'm talking about like in their 20s already, and here
Mhm.
I'm this like 17-year-old kid, like sneaking into bars with them and
Yeah.
like doing drugs. And like from 17 to 18, some of these older guys that I knew like started getting into like heroin
Right.
and doing a lot of like heavy things.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is really like a black hole.
Mhm.
Like, like being involved in, like here I am 17, 18, being involved in like bad drug deals and like,
Yeah. Like,
like,
like where does it stop? Like it just keeps
yeah,
going, going. Mhm.
yeah. And so or like fights or, you
Mhm.
know, going to parties and all, like always expecting to be there a fight. Like,
Yeah.
um, and, it just, I was like, I need to get out of here. Like, especially when some of these other people like started getting into like those heavier drugs, and
Hmm.
it started to really become an issue there. So um, that's when I ended up like just saving up money and leaving. Um, and I continue to have my struggles throughout
Sure.
my later
Mhm.
years, but
As expected, though, like it's not like you would just go from 0 to 100,
yeah,
it's bound to be struggles.
yeah. And so with my work now and working with the teens I do, um, you know, I feel like I can very much relate in
Hmm.
some senses. I mean, I'm significantly like older from from when I went to high school, but I mean, at the same time, it's the same, like
Yeah.
struggle to fit in, suicidal ideation, and
It's
I
the same struggle, it's just a different time.
different time.
Mhm.
Um, so I think one main goal of mine is to try to address these things early on and advocate
Hmm.
for these teens and help them learn more therapeutic skills that maybe I didn't know.
Sure. What are
And
some of those things that come to mind? I mean, even reflecting on your own experience, what you felt like with the information you have now could have been helpful, or things you've noticed have been helpful for the teens you work with now.
I mean, I think teens just want to be heard
Yeah.
and um not given like bullshit, to
Yeah.
be honest.
Hmm.
Like I think, and everybody has their own style, but I think the reason I've been able to develop rapport with teens so well is that I'm just very straight up with them. I'm like,
Hmm.
I put down that therapist, guard, but with still
Yeah.
boundaries, of course, in that
Sure. Hmm.
but it's like, you know, I'm being real with you, and
Hmm.
like these are the situations that could happen.
Yeah.
Like this is what's going on in your circumstance. I'm here to help you, and we can talk about coping skills. And if someone's already been like hospitalized,
Hmm.
a lot of the teens that have been hospitalized already are already like I know the lingo, like
Right.
I'm going to compare what medication I'm on to my friend or
Hmm.
what self-harm I'm doing. And so, I just tell them like, I want to find out what actually is going to work for you.
Hmm.
And, coping skills can sound like sunshine and rainbows.
Hmm.
And I know, what like they tell you in the hospital, like, are like, hey, let's go take a walk, or like, hey, like, you know,
Hmm.
all those like
Yeah.
standard ones that we all say,
Yeah.
and I still say,
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. But
but
like from at that age, it's like take a walk. Come on.
yeah, it's like,
Hmm.
okay, okay, Laura.
Right. No thanks, but okay.
Yeah. So I always just am very straight up. I'm like, what are you actually gonna do?
Hmm.
Like, like I don't like. There's no point in me being here,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to help you,
Hmm.
and like I just want you to be honest. Like I'm on your side.
Yeah.
And then I reflect back on, where do you want to be? Are you
Hmm.
happy at this state? Like, where this road goes. You're still a teenager,
Right.
whether you like it or not. This is just the reality of your circumstance.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I feel like just being straight up, but also having that trust there,
Hmm.
because being straight up and being like authoritative is not helpful.
Right.
Like being scared straight doesn't actually work.
No, no. I mean, teens really, I mean, they're exploring that independence. They want to feel empowered and like they're able to make their own decisions. Like someone coming in and saying, this is what you need to do. This is what you should be doing. It's just going to go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm. What does that look like in terms of like working with parents with the teens that you work with? Because I only work with adults now, but I have some young adults that are like 18 I work with that started therapy when they were teens, and they've had this unfortunate experience of therapists still kind of like violating their privacy or involving their parents in ways that they felt uncomfortable with. So for you, like, what does that look like to strike that balance if parents have to be involved at all?
Sure. So, I mean, like whenever I meet with someone, especially a teen, again, just being that straight up policy, I'm like,
Yeah.
if you're going to harm yourself
Mm-hmm.
or hurt another person, then that is when, you know, I'm going to break this
Yeah.
and I will have to tell your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Just having that conversation straight up rather than tiptoeing about it.
Right.
Um, and, and then I, sometimes explain it's like, it's not that you can't trust me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I want to keep you safe. These
Right.
people want to keep you safe. We're all trying to help where you want to go,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to guide us there as well as me guide you there.
Yeah.
Um, I think, working with children and teens in general is again, finding that autonomy and,
Mm-hmm.
um, like I want to work with you
Right.
rather than, work against you or tell you what to do.
Absolutely. Like really making sure that they know that they're the boss, essentially. Like they're
Right.
in
Yeah.
charge. When I worked with teens and kids in my previous job, there was one teenager where they would just give me rundowns of like Love Island episodes. And that would be our therapy sessions. And at first, like I'm a new therapist, I'm like, am I allowed to do this? Like this doesn't feel like
Right.
therapy. But
Yeah.
that showed them like, okay, like this is safe. Like I do really have the control and space here to like do what I want essentially. And that kind
Right.
of set the foundation for like trust and opening up and focusing on other things later. But it's so funny because in the moment you're kind of like, I don't
Yeah.
know, but let's lean
Yeah.
into it. Let's go with it.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, in undergrad, my last field placement was at a child and adolescent residential unit in Boston. And, all bright-eyed, like, like therapists, like you have a, like, thought that, this is what therapy is. This is what
Yep.
like progress looks like.
Hmm.
And I think like one of the PhD or students I was like being supervised under, and they're like, Luccas, like just playing a game with someone or like
Yeah.
throwing a football or like talking about music or um that's more important than you think it is. Like
Hmm.
some of these kids and teens haven't had that connection with someone,
Yeah.
like just being able to talk. And so has stuck with me ever since.
Hmm.
So like when I'm meeting with a teen brand new, like, you know, I'm like, do you know why I'm here? Like, do you know what I do?
Hmm.
Like, and then I ask the same questions to the parent
Yeah.
because like I want everybody to be on the same page. And then usually like, I'm doing an intake that first time and like have to get consents and stuff.
Hmm.
But I also want to begin to develop rapport. So,
Right.
um, I, um, I end up like presenting it as I have to do a lot of boring paperwork
There we go.
or, or I can get to know you first. Like,
Hmm.
so tell me which one you want to start with.
Yeah.
Like, there's either all this boring stuff, which I'll try to make as painless as possible, or
Hmm.
we can kind of just, shoot the breeze.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I like
um,
that because it's starting off like just very honest and aware too.
yeah.
Good. What other
Mhm.
things have you noticed have been helpful in terms of building rapport with teens?
I think genuinely getting to know their interest is important. If you have a teen that is like totally shut off and like doesn't want to be there, and doesn't want to tell you anything about themselves, even like stuff they like, then I always try to break the ice of like, like telling them a little bit like about me in a way that's not, that there's still boundaries set,
Right.
and not disclosing too much, but in a way trying to humanize myself.
hmm
Like this is like the music I'm into. Like,
Yeah.
I like these sports teams, or like, just different things in order to be able to connect.
hmm
You know, I think it's important to connect with whoever you're working with.
hmm
Even if you don't understand, or like don't have the same interest, or don't know what they're talking about,
hmm
but to show interest in them telling you about it
Yeah,
rather than being dismissive.
absolutely.
Um, like I had a teen, that I did an initial visit with at their home, and I went upstairs. Well, first mom had rescheduled and canceled on me.
hmm
And then the next meeting, mom calls me again, and she's like, I don't know. He woke up kind of grumpy, and I don't know if he's going to want to meet with you. And I'm like, hey, no problem. I'll still come.
hmm
I'll come say hello. And if he wants to meet, then great.
Yeah.
At least we can, you and I can talk about a little bit about concerns and like behavioral stuff and mental health stuff
hmm
going on. And she's like, okay, if you want to. So then then I get there, and like, he's up in his room, doors closed, and I knock on the door, and I'm like, hey, and I like, and that old emo, like still trying to be cool guy. So
Right.
I'm like, hey dude, like it's Lucas, like,
Love that.
um, and he says hello to me, and then just completely shuts off. And I'm like,
hmm
okay, I'm not gonna stay bothering you. So I go back downstairs, and I talk to mom, and I'm like, hey, how about, you go up there and tell him, you know, um, he doesn't have to meet with me, but I'm gonna chill for a little while, like
hmm
for a few minutes, and well, we're just gonna talk a little bit, and like mom and I, and if he decides to calm down during that time, then great.
hmm
If not, and making it in his terms,
Yeah.
you know,
hmm
rather than like, I'm here, you need to meet with me.
Right. Right. Because it plays
And
into that power dynamic too, that
exactly.
is just inherently we need to try to dismantle as therapists for all clients, but especially with teens when they especially don't want to feel overpowered.
Right. And so he ended up coming down.
Yeah.
Um, and he was like all he wanted to talk about was like the YouTube videos he watches, and like games and stuff like that. And I, like I'm like, yeah, we can talk about whatever right now. And
hmm
then you gauge the situation. If rapport is going great, then try to incorporate like, hey, like, do you know why I'm here to talk about these certain things? And in this situation, he completely shut down and like wanted to get up. And
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, we don't have to talk about that stuff right now.
hmm
Like, how about you just like, we keep hanging out, and like,
hmm
you know, I'm really interested in what you're showing me. So like, can you explain a little bit more? And,
hmm
just putting the ball back in their court.
Right. Trying to sprinkle it in, but like just being mindful of when to step back too.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
For you, because a lot of this too is very much informed by your experience. I mean, you're in school getting your MSW anyways, but what's been your experience with transference and countertransference?
Ooh, yeah.
Because
Oh no.
I feel like that may come up.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
hmm
I don't know. I guess I haven't thought about it much. Do you have any experience with that?
I think I've had, I guess, both, right? And honestly, I get them mixed up. So I'll just give some examples. But, like myself
That's
as
why
a
I wanted
teen.
you to go first.
Yeah.
You caught
Myself
me
as a
off guard.
teen that we've talked about before is like I've had depression and everything, and there's been some things with family dynamics that I've really related on teens with, and being like the forgotten middle child, like stuff like that has always resonated with me. And so there's moments where not that I don't think it affects my practice, but it certainly affects, I guess, like the level of empathy I have.
Yeah.
Because you certainly are like, yeah, I get that. But not so the client knows, oh, they have their own stuff going on.
Yeah. It's like, Laura, it's all fucked up too. So
Right. I've also had some clients, like a teen ask me if I was also in therapy. And that was a space where I openly shared that. I didn't get into like the whys or anything like that, even though I think they also had depression, but that wasn't really the space for us to get into that. But it was affirming for her to know, like, okay, like this is like it's a normal thing. It's fine.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I would say my experiences are very similar. And I tread lightly, and this is where your last episode, great supervision, comes in.
There we go.
um, in order to be aware of that implicit bias and that how your experiences kind of go and transfer into like your client you're talking with, because you don't want to like in a sense you want to give everybody you're working with the same amount of you know I don't know, for lack of a better term, attention
Right.
or and but it does hit close to home when you're like, I've been there, I've been in your shoes. Um, but reminding yourself this isn't about you. I mean, then we're getting to self-disclosure. And I like how you put it. It's like when, someone's like, hey, do you go to therapy too? I always word it and I'm like, I'm a strong believer that everybody should go to
There we
therapy.
go.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, everybody can benefit from, their struggles because everybody has them.
Yeah.
And sometimes I phrase that with some teens or kiddos I'm working with, like when I'm sitting down with their parent, I'm like, I feel sad sometimes, like I have a crappy day. Sometimes I don't want to go to work.
Yeah.
And I'm like, mom or dad, do you think they have crappy days or feel depressed sometimes? Most likely. And then the parent usually agrees. And
Yeah.
I hope they agree. But then it takes off that stigma that I'm messed up. I'm failing, and just having that sense of belonging that I'm not alone.
Definitely. Now, have you ever had an experience with a client like particularly identified with you? Because like an experience I had was just because I started practicing pretty young, when I was working with teens, even older teens, there would be a couple that kind of looked at me as like an older sister, something like that, which in itself is not problematic because, of course, like we would almost talk like, like I'm like that mentor to them. And so it's understandable that they would feel that way. But has that ever been a part of your experience that you know of?
Yeah, no, I definitely have felt that way probably many of time, that where I'm probably like that older brother or something like that. But again, that's just when you establish and have those talks about strong boundaries.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, I really like talking to you about this, and I feel like, we have a great trust going on, but just a reminder, like, this is like what we're here for, and I really appreciate like invalidating, like and validating, not invalidating,
Right.
and validating how they're feeling, and it. I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the client, but again, boundaries, supervision.
So important. So important.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was one space where I had a client who was graduating, and they were just like, I would just love if you could come to my graduation. And you can't, right?
Yeah, that's a
So
tricky one. Yeah.
I mean, it sucked because obviously in the moment, like they're so excited and you don't want to be like, well, I'm about to burst your bubble, right? But
Right.
I just framed it in this way of like, we would have our time to celebrate. Like I could bring in like a cupcake or something for them in our session. We could talk about that and even use that time to just like celebrate them and empower them, but to hold that boundary of, you know, we'll talk about this together in our time together, but I can't like go out of my way to show up at your graduation, at least in the role that I was in. You know, there's some workers like child protection workers or
Right,
more
right.
like things where I think that overlaps a little bit more, where they could potentially show up to events like that.
Yeah, it's a little bit more gray.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and again, it's me going back to that straight up component. It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, I'd love to,
Mm-hmm.
like, but I this is this is why I'm here, and that's not
Yeah.
something I really can't do,
Mm-hmm.
and I know we've talked about this before, and it's not to hurt your feelings or anything
Right.
like that, or it doesn't mean I don't care. It's just
Mm-hmm.
in my role, that's just, like a no-no,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, like you have no-nos in certain jobs, and
Mm-hmm.
that's one, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, to kind of wrap up, as we wrap up today, is there any, I guess, advice with the knowledge and information you have
Oh,
now in this
geez.
world? Like, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh, man.
I know, it's quite the question.
I, what would I tell my younger self? Let's see. I would say you're not alone, and not everyone has to understand you, but know there's people that want to help,
Hmm.
even if they don't get what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, because again, that power dynamic of like control,
Hmm.
um, not wanting to feel like you're being controlled or told what to do,
Right.
knowing someone is there and that I may not understand,
Hmm.
um, help me understand, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And final question. What would you recommend to other professionals, other social workers working with teens from your own
Be
experience
straight
and from
up,
your work?
straight up.
Straight up. Biggest takeaway is just be straight up.
I mean, think about yourself when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't have struggles,
Hmm.
like, how would you want to be talked to? You want to
Hmm.
feel validated. You want to feel respected,
Hmm.
um, like any of us do, even
Yeah.
as adults. Put your therapist's voice aside for a second.
Hmm.
Like, put all that textbook learning aside for a second, and that's really, we're all human,
Yeah.
and it take away that power dynamic. You know,
Hmm.
that's
Absolutely. I
so
like
straight up.
that. Straight up. Straight up. I would also say too, like, just be mindful of, I think, your own biases when working with teens, because
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of Facebook groups and a lot of, different Instagram communities, there's this just idea of like, working with teens sucks and, ooh, that's so rough. And even if it does come with its struggles and difficulties, like to walk into that space being like, ugh, this is the worst.
Yeah,
Like that's
because
going to affect your work.
and it's gonna affect the person you're working with.
Absolutely.
Like, well, this girl Laura doesn't want to be here, so like, F her. I'm not gonna tell her shit.
Right.
Coming in with
Absolutely.
that attitude, Laura.
Mhm. You know me.
You're right.
Oh my gosh. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Lucas, for coming on the podcast again. You're
Yeah.
always a pleasure to have. Just so
Oh,
much
thanks.
really helpful insight and experience. For those listening, can you remind them where they can follow you?
Sure. So I started a new Instagram
Yes.
handle That's for my mental health advocacy, awareness on males with eating disorders, redefining masculinity, and doing my part in working as a BIPOC man in social justice. And my handle for that is Dad, and then Boots number 2. So Dad
Perfect.
Boots 2.
There we go.
Yeah, and I share some other podcasts I've been on, including this wonderful one called the Social Work Bubble Podcast. I don't know if you heard of that.
Wow. Full circle moment.
Full circle. And yeah, I just share some stories, advocacy on there, podcasts that I've been on, and then also supporting my other social workers out there in the community. And yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for being on. For those listening, feel free to follow the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on, and we will see you next time.